Okay, welcome everyone to our Parsha discussion. This week is a double Parsha of Chukat Balak, which I believe means that we are back on Israel's schedule, or Israel. We have meshed up schedules again because the second day of Shavuot was on Shabbat this year, and Israelis don't celebrate 2 days of Shavuot. It means that since Shavuos, in Israel they've been reading a Parsha ahead of us. This week they'll only read Balak, and we read Chukat and Balak, and so we're back on one schedule together, which is kind of nice. But that is just trivia. It has nothing to do with our Parsha discussion. It's always hard with a double Parsha. What do you skip? What do you talk about? But I wanted to talk about Balak and Bilam, and the idea of climbing the mountains in this week's Parsha. So in this week's Parsha, the storyline has a little bit of it's almost like verses with chorus in the middle. The king of Moab, whose name is Balak, is feeling nervous about Bnei Israel's sort of rise to prominence in that region of the world. And so he decides to go on the offensive, not a physical attack on the people, but he hires a Navi for hire, a prophet who is happy to go prophesize for whoever it pays him. His name, confusingly, is Bilam. So King Balak, prophet Bilam, and he says, please come and curse the people of Israel for me. And Bilam is a layered character, perhaps is what I would say. He seems to have some honesty, and he was a little bit hesitant to go and do this. And when God says, wait, he says, oh, sorry, like I thought I was allowed to do this. But once that all sort of gets ironed out throughout the plot line, Bilam comes to Balak, and let me share my screen. We'll see the first verse here, as I would put it, is, it says, let's see, here we go. It says that V'kach Balak et Bilam v'yalehu bamot Baal v'yar misham k'tzei ha'am. So Balak takes Bilam up a mountain to Bamot Baal, where he can see some of the people, some kind of high ground. And he says, please curse the people. And Bilam opens his mouth and no curses come out. And here in this instance, he says, Ma ekov lo kaboel, uma ezom lo za'am Hashem. How can I damn whom God has not damned? Right? Bilam, despite being paid to explicitly curse Bnei Israel, is having a hard time summoning that kind of prophecy for himself and for Balak. And so, that might have been the end of the story. Balak would have said, well, I'm not paying you, buddy, and sent Bilam on his way, and that would have been the end. But interestingly, Balak adds a second verse, right? A sort of a second iteration of the same 2-pasuk pattern, because he says, well, let's try another place. It reminded me of that old Israeli folk song, Mishaneh Makom, Mishaneh Mazal, right? He thinks, well, Bilam couldn't manage to rustle up a curse for me on Bamot Baal. Let's go find somewhere else. And so he says specifically, El makom acher asher tir'anu misham efetz katzehu tir'eh, v'kulo lo tir'eh. So here, come to another place from which you can see them, but you'll only see a portion of them, not all of them. V'kavno li misham, and there you can damn them for me. Vayikachehu tzedei sofim el rosh hapiska, v'yiven shiv'a mizbachot v'yal par v'ayel hamizbeach. And so he takes, with that, Balak takes Bilam to this Tzedei Sofim, which is some kind of lookout, it seems, from Rashi, on the top of Har Pisgah, and they set up these altars. And so Rashi says, well, why did Balak take him to the Har of Pisgah? Why did he think that would be the lucky place in which Bilam would manage to get the curse out for Bnei Israel? And so he explains this super interesting theme, which we'll see run through the song, the verses, and also tonight's class, that Rashi thinks that Balak has some kind of prophecy. And it's interesting that he says, Bilam lo haya kosem ke Balak. And you wonder, why is Balak hiring out Bilam if he's a better prophet, if he's a better sorcerer, right? It's a little unclear, but Rashi believes that Ra'a Balak sha'atita pirtza lihivaretz b'Yisrael misham. that at some time a breach in Israel would originate from there. Shesham meet Moshe. And so Rashi says, actually, he's right? He foresaw an accurate thing that Moshe, and I brought the pasuk here, right? That Moshe, it tells us when he goes up, right? We don't know exactly where Moshe dies for many reasons, perhaps, but we know that it's somewhere at the top, the Rosh HaPisgah. And so Rashi says, well, Rosh HaPisgah, Balak must have seen that this was going to happen. And he thought, right? And so he thinks, oh, well, this is like a bad place. It's like bringing someone to a haunted house, it's getting them into a dangerous spot. And so there was like a little bit of strategy here, right? Balak isn't just bringing him anywhere. He's bringing him to a place that he sees somehow will be unlucky for Bnei Israel in the future. Of course, we know that the refrain is the same, right? Bilam is not able to bring out any curses. He just brings out a sort of a thought about God and how God is in charge, right? And he ends saying, "Hine varech lakachli uverech lo velo asivena," right? That his message was to bless. When God blesses, he can't reverse it, right? He's reminding Balak, "I'm a prophet. I'm not a politician, right? You paid me to give a prophecy, and you want it to be bad, but if God is making it good, what can I do, right?" Something like a little bit endearing about Bilam, I think. So you would think, again, that would be the end. And yet there's a third verse, is what I would say, a third, part to this story. Similar, right? Very similar to the last one. Balak says, okay, well, let's try again. Let's try one more place, right? One more time. Right? He's responding to Bilam. He's saying, maybe God will finally allow you to curse them from this place. Vikach Balak et Bilam, Rosh HaPa'or Hanishkaf al Pnei Yeshimon. Right? So he now takes him to this place called the summit of Pa'or, Rosh HaPa'or. And Rashi, again, is going to point us to what bad thing is going to happen there. And so he says, the top of Pa'or, what is going to happen in Pa'or? Balak Kosim Gadol Haya Balak, right? Again, he seems to be a good soothsayer or prophet or magician in his own right. That Bnei Israel is also going to be cursed at Pa'or. Right? Rashi says he's not such a good prophet, right? He's not a prophet, he's an astrologer. And astrologers are not perfect. And so he doesn't know exactly what bad thing is going to happen there, but he sees that something bad will happen there. And Rashi gives us this sort of like, inner monologue. Right? So he says Balak is just an astrologer. He's not a prophet. And so he sees something bad will happen. He's not exactly sure what. But Rashi says, but we know, and again, we see the same, right? This is when we get the most beautiful of Bilam's prophecies, which actually makes it into our own davening. But we can see that, right, we're right now in chapter 23 in Perek Kaf Gimel. And when we get to Perek Kaf Hey in next week's Parsha, we actually find Pa'or. So Rashi doesn't point us to it. He just says Balak knows something bad will happen, but we actually can know what happens just by looking, we don't have to go all the way to Devarim. We can look in the next week's Parsha. And this is some kind of zanut, some kind of sexual profanity that happens to Bnei Israel with the Benot Moab. It's a little bit unclear what it is. But it leads them it leads Bnei Israel to somehow worship other gods. And the people partook of them and worshipped that God. And Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, and God was enraged with Israel. And so I think at this moment, it seems to me like if we sort of back up to Rashi here, right? Balak wants a curse. And when he's not getting what he wants, he is trying to go to a place, it seems like sort of from like a magic kind of place. He's trying to go to a place where he foresees bad stuff happening in the future. It's like, actually, it's the opposite of a haunted house, right? He's going to the place where there will be a haunted house in 150 years or whatever it is, because he hopes that somehow God will look at that place and say, oh, wow, bad things are going to happen here. I will curse Bnei Israel. But I think that when you look, so that's like sort of approach one, is to say, what is the point of these hills? That they're actually, it's not about their geographical nature of being a hill. They're the places in which bad things happen to Bnei Israel.
Excuse me.
God bless you. Which I think is an interesting read. And then I think that it helps us understand this last piece, that basically Balak is so angry when for the third time no curses come out, that he fires Bilam, right? He says, go home, I'm not paying you. And Bilam's defense is lo uchal avor pi Hashem. I am just transmitting God's words. La'asot tova ora milibi. I am not in control. You weren't asking me to say a poem. You were asking me to say a prophecy. God did not say that. Asher yedaber Hashem oto adaber. I will say exactly what God tells me to say. Right. And it's I think that is a beautiful message. Right. God was not going to curse Bnei Israel. Right. There is a relationship between God and Bnei Israel. Balak and Bilam were not going to get in the middle of it. It was going to be okay.
Why, excuse me, why does Balak hate the Jewish people so much that he wants them cursed?
It's a great question. I think it's less that he hates them and more that he's worried about them. He's intimidated, right? It's like a new nation that's growing up and becoming stronger and more savvy and has more military prowess. And so he wants them not to bother him. It's an offensive, but I don't think it's right. It's not like anti-Semitism the way we think about it today. It's more of like a military perspective, which is a great segue to I think the other way we can think about this when we look at this piece of Bamidbar right here is to say, maybe this was already happening. Right? If the two prakim are pretty close together, and presumably it didn't happen like all in 1 minute when we read this pasuk, right? And so it's possible, this is Rabbi David Kasher's idea, not mine, that Balak knows that Bnei Israel is misbehaving right now. Right? He knows that they're doing these things that like Bnei Israel isn't supposed to do or doesn't do. And so it's not that he brings them to Baal Peor because he sees some kind of like astrological curse that's about to happen. It's because he knows it's already happening. This is like politics, right? We've moved out of the world of prophecies and soothsaying and astrology. And he says, Bilam, let me take you up to this mountain where you can see all the people doing really bad things. Come on, like give them a curse. Of course, God's going to curse them, right? It's almost like as if they were, right? Whatever it was, it seems like it was very obviously bad. And I think that is a super fascinating idea, because if you look at the mountains, I think they play more of a geographical role, right? In the first mountain, he can see Kitsei Ha'am, a portion of the people. And then at the next one, you can see a portion, presumably a slightly larger portion, but not all of them. And then when he gets to the top of Peor, it says that he could see everybody. Did I not bring you the right pasuk for that? Uh-oh. Well, you'll have to trust me here. I think I must have just left out a pasuk because it overlooks Pnei Hayashimon, the wasteland, but it also says that Bilam saw all of the different tribes, all of the Shvatim, right? That's why he is able to bless them in such like a cohesive, collective way, right? And so it's like Balak is saying, look at these terrible people. And Bilam says, I don't see anything so bad. He goes, well, look, let's look at more of them. Right? He says, I still don't see anything so bad. And then he says, look, this is like the worst thing you could see. All of Bnei Israel doing this terrible thing at the same time. How could you not see how bad that is? And Bilam still can't see it. And of course, God punishes Bnei Israel terribly in next week's Parsha for the incident at Por. At Pisgah, but it's not at Peor, sorry, that was the right one, at Peor, but it's that's like between God and Bnei Israel. It's still, God is not going to let them get in between Balak and Bilam get in between Bnei Israel and God, which I think is nice. I think all of this, I like it. I think it's interesting. I'm curious what everyone has to think, but I want to sort of turn it around on its head in a second. But I'm happy to take thoughts or comments, questions. Okay. So I want to do something a little bit radical, not as radical as last week, but a little bit radical. So far, we've been thinking about two actors here, right? Bilam and Balak. They are working together, perhaps, or maybe against each other in this like dance of blessings and curses. And this story is told from like an omniscient perspective, right? We know all of the dialogue between Bilam and God and Balak and God. We know about the donkey and Bilam, right? We know everything. But there's a fascinating piece of Gemara in Baba Batra, and I don't know why it's all bold. And this piece is much bigger. It talks about lots of different authors of biblical books, which is sort of interesting in its own right, because, right, I think often we say, oh, who wrote the Torah? God wrote the Torah. But the Breita here is considering the authors of the biblical books. And it says, Umi Katvan, who wrote them? Moshe Katav Sifro, he wrote his own book, which here it says, i.e. the Torah, but I think what the Gemara means from a sort of traditional perspective is the book of Devarim, right? That's the book that Moshe narrates. Moshe wrote the book of Devarim, and maybe he wrote down the Torah. Parshat Bilam v'Iyov. And fascinatingly, that he wrote the portion of Balaam in the Torah and the book of Job, Iyov. And it leads to this interesting idea that perhaps both the book of Iyov and this Parshat Balaam are in some way like some kind of dream state for Moshe, some kind of other experience of Moshe's, because how would Moshe know, right? That's sort of what I think the Gemara is asking on some level. How does Moshe know the inner workings of Bilam and Balak's conversations and Bilam's thought process? And so there is an idea that perhaps what this means, what the rabbis were pointing to, is saying that Bilam is like Moshe's alter ego, right? Moshe is super frustrated with Bnei Israel, right? They are messing up at every turn in the road, and he's constantly having to fish them out of trouble. And it seems like perhaps he's having a dream where one part of his alter ego, right, that's on one shoulder, is saying, let's curse Bnei Israel, right? You're always so good, Moshe. You're always bailing out the people. What if you just gave them a good curse? Wouldn't that be so satisfying? Right? And the other little guy on his other shoulder is Bilam. And he's saying, no, actually, God wants these people. It wouldn't be satisfying. Actually blessing them and defending them, that's like what I'm meant to be doing, right? Exactly what the Lord says I must say. And so it's almost as if Moshe is like playing out his leadership role or his leadership capacity in his own head. And when I read that idea, it reminded me of some of my favorite leadership thinkers in the secular world, Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky. They wrote a beautiful book called Adaptive Leadership. It's like one of the books that every Jewish professional reads in graduate school, as did I. And they talk about this great image that I pulled like a tiny bit from an article that they wrote for the Harvard Business School about getting on the balcony. The dance floor versus the balcony. And I think this, of course, applies to leaders, but it applies to humans in real life, right? Most of our life, we live on the dance floor. It's loud. There's lots of people. It's like hot and sweaty down there. You're doing a lot of things really fast. And that's life. But that sometimes you have to go to the balcony. You have to like take that step back. You have to, I would argue, go up the mountains, right? You have to get higher and higher off the ground, get onto the balcony where you can see the dance floor. Because seeing the dance floor allows you to be a better leader of probably your own life and what Heifetz and Linsky are talking about are organizations, right? And so here they say the ability to maintain perspective in the midst of action is critical to lowering resistance. Any military officer knows the importance of maintaining the capacity for reflection, especially in the fog of war. And I love that because I really think that's where Moshe is. Moshe is in the fog of war. He is trying to get this like big unhelpful bundle of people from point A to point B, and it's really hard, right? At every step in the road, he is encountering resistance, and he's having a hard time reflecting, I think. Right? They say great athletes must simultaneously play the game and observe it as a whole. We call the skill getting off the dance floor and going to the balcony, an image that captures the mental activity of stepping back from the action and asking what's really going on here. But taking a balcony perspective is extremely tough to do when you're fiercely engaged down below, being pushed and pulled by the events around you, and by doing some pushing and pulling of your own. And I really feel like this could have been written as a commentary on the Parsha, because I think that is Moshe to a T. Moshe is in the fog of war. He is on the dance floor, and he is having a hard time gaining some perspective. And I think that you could read this Bava Batra and the tradition that comes from it, that Moshe is sort of imagining what it would be like to be the Bilam, to say both that he's trying on a different perspective, which is like a fantastic way to get perspective, right? He's trying on the role of the prophet for hire, who has no skin in the game, who has no obligation to the people. And he's going to the balcony. That's what I love about the mountains. Like, he's getting higher and higher up so he can see more and more of the people, not to see the bad things they do, right? Maybe he does see them. Maybe he doesn't see them yet. I don't know the exact chronology, but I think that he's trying to see more of the people from that bird's eye view, from the perspective of like, what is our grand plan? How do we get back on track with our mission? And that when I imagine that if Moshe did have this like sort of as a dream, and there are lots of interesting textual pieces, like we could dig into another time about why it might be a dream. Apparently the word Pa'or is like indicates dreamland, and it's written all as one chunk, almost as if like it was like what Moshe went to sleep. He wrote all this in his head, and then he woke up and picked back up where he left off before the dream, right? This is sort of like an odd story encapsulated in a much longer journey. And so I could imagine that if he was dreaming and he woke up, that he might feel refreshed, right? Like sometimes if you have a dream where you yell at someone, you like got it out of your system and you can move on, right? Or if you have a good dream, sometimes it lingers. Even if you were kind of annoyed at someone, you feel like good about them if you had a good dream about them. And so I think that perhaps we could think of the repetition as like Moshe trying out lots of different ways of trying to curse Bnei Israel, or maybe not, maybe saying, I actually don't need to. And that with each step up the mountains that he takes, he's gaining that balcony perspective to help him wake up refreshed as a leader. So I think often when we think about the story of Balak and Bilam, it feels very, very outside of our own experience, because it's about prophets for hire, which we don't have anymore. It's about strange talking donkeys. There's a lot of like funny things, and that this to me makes it feel very personal, that if Moshe's job was to get off the dance floor and onto the balcony, it's such an interesting way that he chose to do that, to explore what it would be like to be someone outside of Israel, and to finish with that strong conclusion of like, I'm not going to curse someone that God is not going to curse. And to wake up feeling back on Bnei Israel's team outside of the fog. So that was where I was heading.
I want to say something about the donkey. I always remember the donkey in this story. And the donkey was being beaten to go forward. And hurry up and go where I want you to go. And the donkey, who usually will, why not, but he didn't this time because he saw something that they didn't. And he decided he wasn't going to do it, even if they were hurting him, even if they were beating him. He just decided he wasn't going to do it. And it turns out that there was an angel that the donkey was seeing, and didn't want him to go forward.
Yeah. I think this story is about a lot about like layers and things that we see and we don't see, and maybe we want to see and we don't want to see. 100%. The donkey fits right in with the theme. I love it. I welcome other thoughts, ideas. Oh, Nelson, you're muted.
No, you cleared probably the usual concept that people have, which and not to be a misconception, but I thought that Balak was like Amalek, was one of the eternal enemies of Israel, anti-Semitism, which you say now he was not so malignant. It was,
Well, it's a fair point, right? He is the king of Moab, which is right. We say not that we shouldn't marry Moabite women. Like it is not a friendly face. But I guess what I would say is he doesn't seem to, the Balak in the Parsha doesn't seem to talk about Bnei Israel in like what I would call anti-Semitic tropes, right? It's not about how bad they are. It's about how powerful they are. And so at least in this instance, it feels more of a military anxiety than a hatred. But you're right that he comes from Moab. He's not like a good guy for sure. Yeah, Ruth, please. Tamar.
We very regretfully must leave because of an obligation at 8 o'clock. But really, this has been so enjoyable.
Oh, it was really wonderful to see both of you.
Pardon
And
me?
I will let everyone go. It was so wonderful to see both of you. I'm so glad you were here.
We hope to see you again. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. And I will let everyone go so that I can actually say I finished in time for people to go to Mincha Maariv. I looked at the calendar and it looks like by August, we should be sort of back on our normal schedule. So I wish everyone a week of being on the balcony, being able to re-enter your dance floor, renewed and refreshed through the power of dreams or perspective or whatever else you can use to get there. So have a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
thank you. Yashikor.
Thank you.